Welcome everybody to the Dutch PHP Conference Diversity and Inclusion in Tech. My name is Tony and I work for iBuildings, the company behind the organization of DPC. Now, before starting the afternoon sessions, let me give you some quick practical information. So know that there is live captioning available. You can find the link on the conference website under the page Practical Info. And during the talk, if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A section on the right side to put all your questions. The speakers will try to answer most of the questions either during the talk or after the talk. But in the event that there is not enough time, my colleagues and I will copy all the questions into the different DPC Slack channels. So make sure that you are also connected to our Slack. All right, so time to start the afternoon now with a talk by our very own Koen Cornelis about You Are Not the User, and after which we'll kick off the panel discussion with Francesca Marano. All right, Koen, the floor is all yours.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the talk, You Are Not the User, Diversity and Inclusion from a Usability Accessibility Perspective. First, a quick note about me, because apparently it's traditional to introduce oneself. I am the father of four. I'm a husband of one. I am Sir Walks-a-Lot to our dog, and I currently work as a UX and software engineer at iBuildings. I'm also a web accessibility specialist, and I am a late convert to IT with previous occupations including administrative aid, climate and human rights campaigner, and ACS teacher and researcher. Now, this talk will be all about users and mainly about what sets us apart from users. There will not be time for questions during the talk, but I will be available in the Slack channel afterwards for anybody who wants to answer ask a question. As a beginning, I would like to ask you a question. How many people do you think have good computer skills? We've made a poll for this in the stage part of the event. You can answer there. I will wait a couple of minutes before, a little while before I continue to give you all a chance to answer. I'm intentionally not defining what good computer skills are. We will see more about that on the next slide, but I'll give you a while to ponder it. See how much confidence you have in users. Okay, I see no more responses coming in. So let's take a look. You guys answered 15% for the most part, with a couple of people answering 5%. And the correct answer is indeed 5%. Now, these numbers come from a study from the OECD, which is basically a club of the industrialized countries. And they did a research in 2016 using data from 2011 to 2015 about how good of a computer skills people had in those countries. Now, they initially envisioned to have 3 levels, poor, medium, and strong, but they had to add 2 extra because of the results of the study. Now, the study showed that only 26% of the population cannot use a computer. On top of that, 14% can do only things like delete an email. So very, very poor computer skills. That's already 40% of the population, on average, that is. 29% can do things like find all emails from John Smith. And a further 26% can do things like find a sustainability-related document that was sent to you last year by John Smith. So all of these things are things which I would consider to be relatively easy, if not very basic computer skills. But this is already level 2, the medium computer skills, and only 5% could do more complicated things. For example, what percentage of the emails sent by John Smith last month were about sustainability, where the idea was you had to combine more than one piece of software to get an answer to the question, unless you were very good at maths. Now, Let me tell you a quick story about part of the reason for these bad computer skills. Now, I used to work as an administrative aide, and we used to work at one of my jobs using Microsoft Word in the 97 edition. Now, I've put a screenshot up showing what it looked like for those of you who can't remember or who weren't around then. But at a certain moment, they switched to a new layout. And after holding out as long as possible, my work had to switch along because of security reasons. Now, this was the new layout. So it's a different layout, but all of the buttons are still there. They're just in a different place. Some of the menu items changed name. And what happened was that most of my colleagues who had been using Word for years at that point suddenly couldn't work with Word anymore. Now, the reason for that is because most people, when they learn to use a computer, or when they're taught in school how to use a computer, is what they learn is recipes. They learn, okay, if you want to do this, you have to follow this step, and then you add this, and then you do this next. And if the recipe somehow gets mingled, if one of the steps changes, then they start to freak out and they don't know what to do. So most people really cannot work with a computer. What they can do is they can follow a recipe. Now, what happens when a recipe fails? Let's take a look at two teens trying to use a rotary phone using the knowledge they have of how a smartphone works.
There you go. Look. It's all the way from here. Yeah. 7. Oh no, 0 is all the way over. Oh, how do I restart? Okay. Yeah. All right. 7. Then just fill it a little bit. Oh, maybe. 8. That's 7. 7. Another 0. Or do you go all the way around back here? Wait. Dude, that makes sense. Wait. Ah, yeah, we got it.
Okay, so fun fact, they don't have it. In fact, without the aid from the mother and the father, they wouldn't have figured it out. And that's, of course, because you have to pick up the phone before you start dialing, even apart from the problem of how you dial. And that's knowledge which is simply not available if you've been accustomed to using a smartphone and if you don't know how to use a rotary phone. And the reason that this happens is because when we use a piece of equipment, we have a mental model in our head of how we should use it. Now, the mental model of a computer can broadly be separated into two kinds for most users. For some users, this is the mental model of a computer. It's basically this thing which sits there, which they can use. But if they press the wrong button or the wrong combination of buttons, the thing will explode. Now, this used to be a lot more prevalent when an OS would still plentifully show a blue screen of death or something similar. These days, most people have switched to another model of a computer, and that's that of a donkey pulling a cart. Now, everybody knows that you can transport quite a lot of stuff with a donkey. It's a very good animal for pulling stuff. Now, if I were to give you a donkey and tell you, okay, you need to get this from point A to B, you probably wouldn't know where to start. And that's what most people have with a computer. They know it can be very useful to them. They know it can save them a lot of time and a lot of effort. But if the thing refuses to move or to budge, they don't know what to do. So basically, they're kind of stuck. Now, this is my model of a computer, my mental model of a computer, which is two toddlers into a cardboard box. These are my two eldest kids a number of years ago. The eldest is 11 now, but at the time of the picture, he was 3. So for me, computers are really stupid things. That is to say, they're very, very literal, just like a 3-year-old is. If I told my 3-year-old, okay, can you go and fetch me something from a cupboard in the kitchen, he would run to the kitchen and he would look into it, not find it, come back and tell me I didn't find it. If I go and watch, I'd see, well, okay, what I wanted is just on top of the cupboard, but that's not where I asked him to look, which is exactly what a computer does. A computer is really stupid. and depends on your input to give something back. This means that people expect the computer to be smart when in fact it is dumb, basically. Also, just like a 3-year-old, you're not going to get any meaningful feedback from it if you mess up. This is more the case in some operating systems than in others, but in general, programs and operating systems are really bad at giving feedback, exactly like a 3-year-old. Now, if something goes wrong, in our case, we can just use git blame and then find out, okay, it was us who wrote the code a year ago. A normal user can't do that, and tends to internalize the guilt. They'll blame themselves when something goes wrong, say, okay, I must be stupid, I must be doing something wrong. And the end result of that is that users are not reporting errors, they're unable to complete a process, and in general, they walk away thinking your software is not really user-friendly. So none of these are helpful things. And it doesn't help that we have this this flowchart, this way of talking about things going wrong with the computer, where we tell them, well, it's not really that hard. You just Google it, right? XKCD made a very famous cartoon about it, where he made a flowchart of what we do when something goes wrong. And this entirely ignores all of the knowledge that we have. Things like what could be the problem? How do you Google? Which words do you use to Google? For example, if you want to differentiate surfing on the web from surfing on the sea, how do you search for the one without getting results for the other? How do you interpret the answers? How do you even find out what is an answer and what is just an ad in Google? How do you not go to a site with malware? How do you prevent your data being lost because you tried something out? So in general, what we say is a very easy thing to do, really isn't all that easy. And the end result of that is that what you should take in mind when people are interacting with a computer is that there's always a secondary goal there. They're never using a computer just for the fun of using a computer. They want to get something done. There's a nice study about this done at an English hospital by the University of Dartmouth, where they wanted to see, okay, what are the security policies? What does the IT staff think about how users are following the policy? And what's the actual case? So first they asked the IT staff, and the IT staff said, well, everything is really fine. Our rules are followed almost to the letter. And then they went to the floor where the physicians worked and the nurses and everybody else. And it turned out that everything was anything but fine. For one, they found sticky notes forming what they described as sticky stalagmites on medical devices in the medication preparation room to share passwords. And one of the best examples in the study, which I highly advise you to read because it's a lot of fun, really, was that they hired the most junior person on the medical team was expected to keep pressing the spacebar to prevent people from logging out due to timeout. So imagine studying for a doctor and then just running around pressing spacebar all day long. Now, usually these were interns doing it, but every now and then it had to be a doctor because nobody else was available. So that's basically how people use a computer. They use it to accomplish something. If they can't accomplish it, they will use workarounds to get their work done in the most expedient way possible, whether or not you agree with it or not. So what sets us apart from a user is in the first place, our computer skills. We are the 0.1% of computer skills. We don't just follow recipes, we create them. We have a much better mental model of how a computer works, not necessarily mine, but I assume you guys do. We don't internalize guilt as much. Our knowledge and therefore our ability to debug problems is a lot more extensive. And our compliance budget, what we're willing to do to work with IT, is a lot bigger than a normal user does. Now, that's of course not the only thing which sets us apart. As you well know, if you know what the topic of the talk is following this this talk. But this alone should be enough to tell you that we are not the user. you are never the user. It doesn't matter what group is your target demographic. You're almost certainly not using the computer the way that they do. Now, what else sets us apart is that we are a very one-sided demographic. We are basically young, bearded white guys, which means that we're losing out on a lot of perspectives. There's way too few women in tech. There's too few people of color. There's too few people with a disability, and so forth and so on. Lots of demographics aren't adequately represented in our teams. And just to give you an idea of the numbers here, like for example, for disabled people, this is an estimate made by Jeroen Hulser in 2019 because he wanted to demonstrate that there's quite a lot of people with a disability, and he used only the official numbers from the Dutch government. Now, giving some overlap between these numbers, he estimated that there were about 4.5 million Dutch people at the time having a disability according to official numbers. 4.5 million, that's 20%, 6% of all Dutch people. That's quite a lot, that's 1 in 4. And this does not include all of the people with a disability which aren't in the numbers that he found. For example, people with autism, people with ADHD, all of the people who have a temporary disability because they broke their arm or something else. All of the people who have a situational disability, for example, if you have glare on your screen or you're standing on a train platform, all of these people aren't included. The same thing can be said if you look at the percentage of computing occupations held by women, is that it's not nearly what it should be. It's only 25% of all IT people who are women, 16% of which are white women. So no, 16% of the overall number are white women, 5% Asian, 3% Black, and 1% Latina. So that's really an underrepresentation as compared to what it should be, which is about half. And this number has been declining steadily for years. So in 1991, you had a peak of about 37% of women in computing occupations, which has declined to about 25% in 2015. Now, what's the problem with a low diversity? So what happens when the diversity on teams is low? Let me give you some example. The woman on the picture is Sheryl Sandberg, who is currently the Chief Operating Officer of Facebook. But in 2004, she was in management with Google. Now, Sheryl was pregnant at the time, and I don't know if you've ever been to the Google headquarters. They have a humongous parking lot, which means that if she arrived late for work, she had to walk quite a distance to get to where she wanted to go. Being highly pregnant, that's not really a nice nice way to start your day. So there had been lots of women who had been pregnant at Google before that. Lots of them had complained about it, but nothing happened until Sheryl Sandberg said, well, okay, you know what? I'm going to take this up with management team, which she was a member of. And things rapidly changed with some parking spaces reserved for women who were pregnant at the start of the parking lot. So this case has a happy resolution, but another example is in 2001 in Gujarat, there was a very big earthquake destroying almost, well over 100,000 houses. Now the government decided, okay, we're going to rebuild the houses. We're going to make a task force for it to see what the design should be, and then we'll start building. As it turns out, when they started building, they'd forgotten a rather crucial part of a house, which is a kitchen. The problem being that men in India generally do not cook. And as a result of that, as a result of the fact that women weren't on the task force, there were no kitchens in the houses. It's a rather glaring oversight, pretty painful for the government. But sadly, it's not an isolated incident. In 2012, the Ford Focus, for example, was the best-selling car in the world, selling over 1 million cars that year. Now, one of the things about the Ford Focus was that it had a navigation system, GPS, with speech recognition. The only problem being that it did not recognize women's voices. So if a woman wanted to use the navigation system by voice, she had to lower her voice, and even then it was, well, basically a coin flip whether or not the system would recognize her. Now, that's probably funny for anybody who's sitting in the car and watching. It's not so much fun for the women trying to get from A to B. Now, when they complained about this, the vice president of ATX, which was a supplier of car navigation systems, he commented, well, what women need is long-term training. That is, if women are prepared to admit their mistakes, which sadly they are not. So you might think, okay, well, this is just a problem while being trained on the wrong data set or whatever. But it turns out that women's voices are actually easier to recognize. And this problem hasn't gone away. The same problem persisted with both Buick and Volvo cross-country cars in 2018. So these are all problems which can be easily solved just by having a little bit of diversity on your team, by testing with different users. Another example, in 2011, Apple came out with Siri. I'm assuming everybody knows what Siri is, but if not, it's a voice-activated assistant for Apple products. Now, when they launched it, Siri was perfectly able to search for things on the internet. Siri was able to give you help with, for example, a heart attack. You could search for Viagra, you could search for prostitutes. Basically, almost nothing was off limits, except for the things which were specific to women. For example, you could not search for an abortion provider. And if you told Siri, well, I need help, I am getting raped, then Siri would reply with, I don't know what you mean with I am raped. It's worth pointing out that over 50% of the customers of Apple at that time, but still today, consist of women. So this seems like a really glaring oversight for them. Another example, this time to do with people of color, is this very nice video of a soap dispenser at the Facebook headquarters.
Okay, Noel, we try now. One to your hand. Two black.
Two black.
Yeah.
What I'll
Come
do
again. Come again, Sashi.
No.
You two back over way.
What I have to do to get
What you have to do
to see how racial this thing is.
Yeah.
I have to use that piece of white. Let's say napkin and show again. So what's the difference? Napkin again.
Right.
So the problem here was that they used an infrared sensor, which if you try out an infrared sensor, the black skin doesn't reflect light the same way that white skin does. And obviously it was only tested on on white skin, sorry. So basically, in a nutshell, the problem with a lack of diversity in your team is the idea that you don't have is the voice that you haven't heard. You will get mistakes in your product because you simply haven't considered all of the angles. Now, depending on your product, this is a big or a small problem. But one thing to take in mind is that you can't easily transport yourself into somebody else's shoes. Because we live on the same earth, but our realities are very different. I'll give you an example of that. Let me show you some numbers for what it's like to be a woman. Now, all of these numbers actually come from the book Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men, which is an awesome book. I highly advise you to read it. It basically details all of the parts in our life where women are being disadvantaged, showing it by just sheer numbers. To give you an example, 47% higher risk of heavy injury after a car crash for women, and 70% higher risk of light injuries. And this is because cars have been designed to match the body of a male of 1.70 meters, which is the average height for a man. So it doesn't take stock of the different physiology of a woman. In the same tack, you've got a 50% higher risk of a wrong diagnosis after a heart attack as a woman. And that's because even in medical training, doctors are learned about heart attack symptoms by the typical symptoms for a man, which everybody knows. It's basically the Hollywood syndrome, where you have the pain in chest area. Only for women, it's a different set of symptoms which tend to occur, which means that they often get sent home because they're imagining things or because it's not serious enough in the opinion of the attending physician, when it turns out that they were actually having a heart attack. Another example, well known, is the average office temperature being 5 degrees too cold. Now, that's because the average office temperature is calculated using an algorithm which doesn't take count of the different metabolic rate for women. Aside from these examples, what you also have is that women's communication styles are very different than those of men. For example, men aren't prone to admitting mistakes, or at least that's what's been shown in research, whereas for women that's less of a problem, at least. Now, this different communication style lowers their chances of getting a promotion, but also leads to the well-known syndrome that when a woman remarks something in a meeting, it happens quite a lot that she's dismissed, and then if a man remarks the exact same thing, that it's heard very well, and people react enthusiastically, and that's not even taking into account the harassment which happens at work. Now, this is a tweet from only 3 days ago by one of senior dev, which I follow on Twitter, a woman. And she says, some of you men have never been constantly harassed, and it fucking shows. If you think we're whining because of what happens online, I've got news for you. It happens everywhere. Physical spaces, virtual spaces, and we're sick of it, so I'm going to keep whining about it. Now, this is something which you hear from a lot of women. In fact, there's been studies as to why there's so few women into tech. And one of the studies shows clearly that the bro culture is part of the problem. Now, this leads to a female quit rate, which is a lot higher across science and technology than it is elsewhere. So for technology occupations specifically, in the first 12 years, over 50% of women leave their job, whereas outside of STEM professions, over the first 30 years, only about 20% of women leave their jobs. So 12 years and 56% leaving their job versus 30 years and only 20% leaving their job. That's quite a big discrepancy. So something is wrong. Now, everybody who works in the front end has presumably seen this site or used this site. Can I use to see what are the differences between support for certain properties in the browser across browsers? So working in front end, you tend to use the site quite a lot in order to ensure that your site looks the same across browsers. Now, what strikes me about this is that we spend more time optimizing the cross-browser experience than we do optimizing the human experience. There are no equivalent tools to Can I Use, for example, to see, well, what's the support among screen readers? There's some tools which try to do the same, but it doesn't have nearly the same support, nearly the same recognition among people. So I think in general, just to conclude, what we know is that we as IT people, we are not users, both in computer skills and in the demographic that we represent. So that's something which we should take into account and try to work with, try to find a solution for. Thank you for listening to the talk. If there are any questions, I'll be answering them into the Slack channel, as I only have 1 minute left, which is probably not enough to answer questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Koen, for this very interesting and insightful talk. So yes, like Koen said, you can ask all the questions in Slack. We noticed that the Slack link that was sent through the mails expired. So you can find a new invitation link either in the chat of Hopin, or we tweeted the new link on our DPC Twitter account. So make sure to use that link if you want to talk with the speakers or the other users. All right, I think it's now time to start the much-awaited panel discussion, which will be led by Francesca Marano. So we'll just, okay, Francesca is there. So I say take it away.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this fine afternoon. I am at the beach and I thought I should say this to make you all a bit mad. We're going to talk about diversity and inclusion in tech. We're going to talk about conferences, how to make them more diverse, and I have here with me 3 fantastic guests. I'll be your host. My name is Francesca, and I'm the WordPress team lead at Yoast. I have led WordPress releases, and I've been part of an historical moment in open source, which is an all women and non-binary people of WordPress. But this is really not about me. It's about the incredible experiences and wisdom our speakers are going to give us today. So I'm just going to go alphabetically so everyone know when their turn is. So we will start with Ayesh. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself so we can kick this off.
Yeah, hi, my name is Ayesh Karunaratne. I was born and raised in Sri Lanka. This is my 3rd time in DPC, so I'm very happy to be here. I mostly work on PHP projects for around 10 to 12 years now. And I'm what I like to call myself a full-time traveler, as in I try to work online exclusively and go and see how things work in different parts of the world. I have met most of the people here before, so thank you for having me here again.
I seem to have a bit of a problem with my audio, so I cannot hear you, which is less than ideal for a panel host. But I think you can hear me, and I don't know why I can't hear you. That's very unfortunate. Angela can hear us on stage. You can hear me, apparently, because I see from your facial expressions that you can hear me, but I cannot hear you. And it's not really great for a, for a moderator. Let me... Everything is good. I have all the settings. And when we did the testing, it worked. This always happens when we go live. It's very unclear. So what we're going to do, we're going to go a bit with signs right now. So Ayesh introduced himself. Juliette, did you introduce yourself? Go. This is going to be a very interesting panel.
This is going to be very interesting. Yeah. Okay. So my name's Juliette, and I'm a developer.
Go.
I work with all sorts of different technologies, mainly PHP, in a wide range of projects, and on a daily basis, I generally jump between 10 different projects. And I'm happy to be here. Zan, you want to continue?
I think Juliette has stopped speaking. So, Zan, I'm sorry.
This is fine.
But it's your turn. I'm going to go with signs until I solve this. No, just a second. I'm going to go out and come back in. And then, but Zan, please introduce yourself in the meantime, while I do a bit of tech support for myself. I'll be back.
Come back soon. My name is Zan. I'm a software developer. I've been doing it for 11-ish years now. I'm involved with mostly the Symfony community, with their diversity initiative, and with their care team, which is the, oh God, can I remember the acronym? It's Code of Conduct Active Response Insurers. That's probably wrong, but we'll just go with that. And mostly doing conferences honestly, I hate conferences. I'm terrified of public speaking, and I do it. I force myself to do it to get better at the things that I don't do day to day. I do mostly programming, and I want to do more interpersonal stuff.
Well, welcome here. You're now on stage.
Congratulations, you're the new moderator.
I think that we will fill in the gaps between the three of us while Francesca is sorting out the technical stuff. So we're talking about diversity and inclusion, and maybe we should define what that is before getting started. Ayesh, you want to have a go at what does diversity and inclusion mean for you?
You're muted.
You're muted, Ayesh. Unmute.
Can someone talk?
Hi.
Hi, I can
You can hear me.
Yes. This is fantastic.
Excellent. I just asked the question for us to define what diversity and inclusion means to each of us.
Thank you.
Ayesh is now looking for his unmute button and is doing that offline. Maybe Zan wants to have a go?
Yes, we'll go the other way around this time.
Sure. Diversity and inclusion. I would say inclusion is the method in which we achieve the goal of diversity. Diversity is it generally just means variety. It means a greater range of experiences, knowledge bases, thought processes. It means connecting to a wider range of customers, employees, business partners, the general public. It just means the more people that the more diverse people that we include, the better we become as a whole.
I couldn't agree more.
That's a very good definition. Thank you. And one that I feel we should spread a bit more, because I think diversity and inclusion has become a bit of a one of those slogans that are used, and they're not always used in the right context, and not always used to actually make a difference. Juliette, what is your definition of diversity and inclusion?
Well, one of the things, aside from what Zan already said, what I'd like to highlight is that it's about celebrating our differences, not about highlighting those differences, but accepting everyone for who they are, and being happy that we're all different, and recognizing that we're all different, and instead of trying to force everyone to become the same to be included. Make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. I like it. I think there's going to be a lot of food for thought after this panel. I'm very excited about it. Ayesh, how would you define diversity and inclusion?
Well, I hope third time's the charm. You can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, finally. Diversity and inclusion, in my personal opinion, would be recognizing that things are different. It doesn't have to be technological diversity. It has to be with people, right? Because we always start with people. People are different. They have different skin colors. They have different languages. They have different everything, right? That's the nature. And inclusion would be making sure that everyone feels welcome, with no matter how different you can be, no matter how diverse you are. Inclusion is that we welcome you with all hands and join us for this thing, or join us in this community, and making people feel happy and feel welcomed into community.
Yes. So all these definitions are incredibly optimistic, and I like that. I really, really like that. And how do you feel the tech community, and we'll talk about conferences in a bit, but in general, the tech industry, like this blob that we call the tech industry, which obviously has, I don't know how many sub-blobs in it. How do you feel that what you think of diversity and inclusion reflects in what you see in the tech industry?
In some things, I do see more diversity than some in some other places, and in other things, I see far too less diversity. And generally speaking, I see too little attention for it. There was a really interesting blog post someone posted yesterday, someone I respected highly, Mika. And one of the things which was pointed out that the lack of diversity is also causing real life problems like stalking online. If you have a very homogeneous group of developers, they might not even be able to imagine that their products can be used for abuse. And having more diversity would definitely make, well, at least give us the opportunity to make our products safer. And that's a business win. And if there's a business win to be had, why aren't we fixing this?
Good question. Zan, how do you feel about where do you think we are with diversity and inclusion in tech?
In some cases, really bad, and in some other cases, really good. Again, I think the diversity in our industry improves without even making any conscious efforts. When we think of ourselves less of an industry and think about the in between industries, multidisciplinary. So we have stuff like designers, project managers, other jobs which I interact with on a daily basis but can't think of right now. But as an industry, we have to remember that PHP is not enough on its own. You can't make a business on just PHP. You still need the designers, the project managers, sales, marketing, all that stuff. And when we interact with and work with a more diverse range of industries, disciplines, people, we are generally improve ourselves without even thinking about it.
Ayesh?
Yeah, I like to be more optimistic about that we are making more progress with diversity and inclusion. Like in the last talk, he talked about we really care about the browser compatibility than thinking about the people. I think that's a really good way to look at it. But we are making tools. For example, Firefox has this tool to check accessibility, and I was really surprised to see even some of the websites I have by myself, they're not accessible at all. And we are learning many new things, and we are developing tools. I think we are making progress. There's still a long way to go. That's why we have this talk and the talk before. But I really think we are on the verge of making everyone aware and on the verge of making changes into the future, which we have already made a lot of changes in the past, and I think we are on the track.
I want to add something that I actually saw today, and it was incredible for me. So I come from Italy. Italy is a country that doesn't really talk about diversity because there isn't much diversity in the sense of, for example, how we look. Italians, for the 90%, look like me, brown hair, olive skin. And that's when I go in front of schools in Italy, it's always I live part-time in England, and when I see schools in England and when I see schools in Italy, it's like two different words. We're really, in this department, we're doing not really a great job. So I wouldn't say that Italy is really a country in the forefront of the battle for diversity and inclusion. And I am at this event while I'm moderating. I'm at an event for freelancers that happens every year in Italy, and it happens at the beach. So not too shabby. And this year we're doing it in a camping site, and in the bar this morning, me and a colleague, we were looking at this and we're like, whoa, there's a sign that says, please keep the level of communication at a lower volume, and don't make abrupt, loud sound, to take into consideration our autistic guests that might be, startled by certain things. And we're like, this is happening. We are finally, realizing that it's not just about the fact that we all look the same, but there's also diversity and inclusion. It's not just binary, right? It's definitely not just in tech. It goes a lot more widespread. So I wanted to share this with you because I was like, this is like serendipity. We're going to talk about this with amazing people in the afternoon, and this is like a small sign that I agree, Ayesh, we are on the verge of changing something, I think. At the same time, people that are a bit older know that we have been on this path for many years now. And so are we really on the verge? How do you feel about this? How do you think, and this is an open question, whomever wants to start replying, just go for it. Do you feel that all these initiatives, then they play out in the real world? Do you see the difference, or some of these initiatives stay on paper as good initiatives to, make a conference look good, make a company look good, but in the day-to-day life, we're not there yet? Who wants to reply?
We're nowhere near there yet.
Yeah, I agree.
And we've been on this path for, if we're looking at the whole world, because it's not just tech, it's a real world problem, and tech is part of that real world, and it's our world, which is why we have a chance to change our world. We can't change the whole world in one go, but I mean, basically this path, we've been on it for, 200 years, and yes, things are getting better, but it's very slow going, it's very slow steps, and we all still have a lot of blind spots.
Yeah,
there is a lot of diversity even I probably am not aware of, and I try to educate myself, and I hope others do as well, to be more aware, and to if you're not aware of something, that you can't change it, you can't take it into consideration, you can't account for it. If you don't have any vegans or vegetarians in your direct surroundings, how would you even think of putting vegan food or vegetarian food on for a conference, or making it available at a company for a lunch menu?
Yeah,
it's making yourself aware of all the differences, so you can broaden the scope of people who will feel welcome.
Yes, I agree. And again, as an Italian, it was really eye-opening to start contributing to open source, because it's, it's a really different perspective on life. But how, Zan, how, because you are English, you're
Yes.
British, and you live and you now live in the Netherlands. So you also maybe can tell us a little bit about also the cultural differences and how these play into the bigger topic of diversity and inclusion. And then in tech, how do they play in tech? How do you feel?
The cultures that I grew up in Britain, and then I moved to Canada, and then I moved to the Netherlands. And I have been involved in diversity and inclusion in all of those countries, but the way you do it is different. Because in Canada, there's like a massive Asian population, because obviously that's the nearest continent to North America. And then in Europe, we have a different type of diversity and inclusion, which is probably, I'd say, it's not better, but it's different, and I think it's happening at a faster pace. Mainly because I think the EU, we're used to so many different cultures crammed into such a small space. And I think the worst thing is knowing I don't think I'm doing enough, or I know there's more stuff I need to learn, and then realizing I'm in like the top 10% of people who care about diversity. It's difficult to feel like there's enough momentum when you know that you're doing more than the average person and you still feel like you're not doing enough. And it may feel like it's not a very effective way of doing anything, but the best thing to do is just make enough noise that other people notice.
I have a recommendation for you. Did you read Bad Feminist by Roxane Gray?
No, but I'll write that down now.
Read it, because she exactly talks about this. She talks about being a bad feminist, because being the perfect feminist might be actually counterproductive to the cause, and being a bad feminist that is both capable of advocating but also dancing to very inappropriate songs that like objectify the women's body is being a bad feminist, but it's also being an effective feminist. So that's a book that I recommend to everyone. It's really good. Ayesh, you bring a different perspective because you come to us from Sri Lanka. So probably diversity and inclusion in the society and in tech in Sri Lanka looks different than it looks in Canada or in Italy.
Now, when you say like the majority of Europe or American continent, it's probably the exact opposite here, because everyone here is Asian and everyone here looks just like me, right? Like when you said about Italy. We do have different ways of diversity, mostly with religion, because I think most of the Asian countries, including Sri Lanka, people are religious, and religion plays a bigger role in here. So we have different problems, but as a world or as bigger community, like Juliette said, I think we have perception of diversity, and the real life can be different. For example, we have this change these culturally insensitive words to better words in the code base. It's just a change, but it doesn't really make any impact in the real world, because changing one word in the code base, it just takes one command to just search and replace. But you cannot fix things like that here. In Sri Lanka, we have 4 religions, and we welcome all the religions because we just like all the holidays, because we have lots of holidays. But in technology, we still have differences with where you live. For example, if you are in the capital, you have more access to learn new things, or even the best universities are there. But if you're from, say, a little bit far away, it limits you from, everything, from learning online things, because internet access could be still a problem. There's language problems, and English is, not everyone speaks English. So it limits how you can reach other things. And when it comes to technology, there are still differences in the technology that you use, but also because now that Sri Lanka is still in a lockdown, the schools are happening online. So not everyone has a device to go online and take part of these lessons. I have at least 10 people coming to this house asking me to help them to set up their laptop or set up their phone because they can go to these online classes or access these PDF files, which are sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. So they're probably different demographics, the things that you will never see until that you actually see the differences. So this pandemic was a really big eye-opener how less the internet has penetrated inside the country. And if there was no pandemic, I think everyone would be fine because we never think about this. So like Juliette said, it's good to see the problems. If we don't have this diversity, we never know that we have this problem in the first place.
Can I respond to that? What Ayesh just did was basically give a perfect definition of what privilege means.
Yes.
Privilege is access without barriers. And that means access to education, access to the right schools, access to internet, access to being able to travel to other countries. But also, like we mentioned this when we did our preparation talk, access to a vaccine. For instance, most of the people here and in the panel today will be able to get their COVID vaccine this year if they want it. There's parts in the world, people in the world who won't have that chance for another 1 or 2 years. This is what privilege is. And privilege is, in a lot of ways, if you don't look beyond your own privilege, that is what's causing barriers. If you've never experienced a barrier in your life, how can you imagine taking away those barriers for other people?
Yeah.
It's about, a company making sure that there's parking which is secure and with a good street light. So if women leave the office late, they actually feel secure going to their car. Stupid things like that, which are actually essential.
Yeah, so I posted another link. I'm on a big binge of feminist books, modern intersectional feminist books. So I'm reading a lot about this because also when you think you're in the right path. For example, I do believe that the cause of feminism is very worthy, and for me, for example, there's no feminism without intersectionality and stuff like that. Then you realize that that's not the same for everyone, and then suddenly the feminisms that some white cheese Caucasian women experience, it's absolutely not the same kind of feminism that I linked to Hood Feminist, which is a great book. And the author is from the south side of Chicago. And she's like, well, for me, feminism is actually, it includes things like food stamps, being able to put food on the table of my family and all this kind of thing. So, and in tech, it's the same. At least that's what I believe. We do a lot of great initiatives to improve diversity, but then, as Ayesh said, not everyone has access to those because they don't have internet access. So it's a massive task, but you have to start somewhere, right? So probably starting from checking our own privilege is a great place. What do you think?
Well, I'm just making sure, if we're talking access, you're going to post the links to those books you mentioned somewhere, just to make sure that people can find them later.
Yes, I did post them in the stage.
Okay.
I think it's the right place, but maybe I need to post them in the event, actually. So I'll post them in both places. So we
idea to post them in the Slack as well, so people can find them.
I'll post them anywhere. Because they're really, really great books that I'm really enjoying, and they are, really talking about. Oh, there's an additional dot here. Sorry. talking about the things in practice. That's what I like about the approach. I like the doing when we do something. So we touch on the subject of privilege, and we touch a little bit on how it is, in our own countries and in the tech industry. And one of the things we mentioned during our pre-calls to prepare for this was also the concept of meritocracy and how it lives with diversity, or it clashes with diversity. So Zan, we discussed this, but let's bring it to the word.
Okay, I'll try and not make this into a massive rant.
I support rants.
Okay, I think
Run away.
Meritocracy is well intended, but ultimately misinformed. Meritocracy is basically, if you're good enough, then we don't care about the rest. But that is you assuming that they have the privilege of education, of internet, being able to learn, the luck of being born into specific countries where you even have the ability to do that kind of stuff. Meritocracy is, the problem is that no one is an expert at anything at the time they're born. Every contributor, programmer, community member was at one point knew nothing. They have to learn at some point everything they know in their life. Everybody has the ability to keep learning and bettering themselves. I think diversity and inclusion is not really giving preference over minorities, over majorities, that kind of stuff, but rather giving them the opportunities to get to the same level as those people if they want to get there. Meritocracy is, I can see its benefits and I can see where it came from, but I do think it's misinformed.
It also very much is a case of how do you define merit? I mean, a lot of open source will often just credit merit as people who commit. Well, what about the people who actually provide support, or the translators, or the people who document, or the people who act as the glue between it all? I mean, they have merit just as much, but they are less visible if the merit is defined by commits. So the definition there is also, what is merit? I totally agree with you, but it's flawed in a lot of ways.
One of my favorite phrases, I'm not sure how to phrase it in a way that works with the tech industry, but the phrase, the cure for cancer may be trapped in the mind of someone who cannot afford education.
Very well said. Very beautiful quote.
Yeah, that's very good.
Yeah, it is true. And I think at least all of us, since we are very dedicated to diversity and inclusion, we have experienced this in some times by, giving someone the chance, sponsoring people to say, hey, you come and talk about this, you come and have the internship, come and join us. And I see this happening all the time, actually. But it takes a lot of work. So Robin was saying, any action the panels recommend. I'm hearing a lot of topics, points, observations, and facts, but not a lot of things which could be done about them. And we're moving into those, Robin, because as I said, we like also to get things done, not to only talk about them. So we can, let's talk about tech conferences. And I think it's a good point because, we started really big. What is our definition of diversity and inclusion? We talked about nations and we talked about tech, but then the conference is really also the entry point of a lot of people in tech. So that's actually a very good point to talk the talk and walk the walk and lead by example. So how can organizers of events, and I think a lot of this advice will also apply to managers in companies, how do you think organizers of events can really throw diversity and inclusion into the mix in a propositive, proactive, useful, impactful way? Should we go alphabetically? Should we start from Ayesh? Let's go with Ayesh.
Yeah. Like we talked in the call before, code of conduct should be like the baseline requirement or baseline practice that we start with, about being opening to everyone and not discriminating people based on the things they can't even change. And like you said, conferences, they open the whole world into technology, most of the technologies at least. Speaking of PHP or Dutch PHP conference, like 3 years ago, I actually was in Juliette's house. We had barbecue there, and that's my most pleasant memory about Dutch PHP conference 2019, I think. All of the talks I don't really remember, but the barbecue, that I do remember a lot.
I'm so happy to hear that.
Right. So now that I have seen the people in real life, now that I had the chance to meet these people, I know Juliette for quite a long time. I'm from WordPress. But now that I get to see these people, it opens up the whole, the personal connections, and also makes you confident about doing something, including technology or going to a conference and being a speaker. And for conferences, I think leading by example is like the best thing that we can do. For example, Dutch PHP conference, I personally think they're doing a very good job with making people feel welcome, making it possible for people to actually make to the conference, starting by supporting financially and having enough time for people to arrange the visas, and the food. We didn't get to go to a physical conference, but if we, fingers crossed, next year, we will be able to go to new conferences. And if the organizers can make sure that people are comfortable with their food restrictions or the times, all the diversity and inclusion once again, if the conferences can support the people, speakers, the attendees, and everyone, to encourage them to go to the conferences, to encourage them to take part in the activities, not just talks. For example, Drupal, they have this trivia night that people hang out, people have fun. I think that's a very good idea to bring people together, not just technical conferences going from morning to evening. So conference organizers and the speakers, attendees, we all have a role to play in making conferences more diverse and inclusive.
Francesca, your mic.
Yes, you have a lag from me. I actually have very good Wi-Fi here, so you should be able to, but maybe, yeah, the wind. Can you hear the wind? Is it very windy? No. I hope you can hear the birds. There's a lot of birds, so that's very nice.
Feedback isn't happening now, but it was earlier.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, thank you, Ayesh. Focusing on the people should really be the first and most important. And then usually when we focus on the people, things happen. What other tips, Juliette, would you have for conference organizers and by extent to managers if something applies as well?
Well, I already mentioned the code of conduct, and the one thing about a code of conduct is don't make it be window dressing. Don't have it just to have it and then ignore it. There's a very famous saying, or all we need to do for intolerance to win, the only thing we need to do for tolerance to survive is to be intolerant of the intolerant. If we see things happening around us, if we see someone who looks like they're not comfortable, ask them if they need help, or if you see someone behave in a way which doesn't feel comfortable either for you or for the people around you, you see something happening, speak up. Not everyone is comfortable speaking up for themselves. Sometimes they will handle it fine, sometimes they won't, but if it's a violation of the code of conduct, speak up. And the people in the underrepresented groups aren't the ones who are in a position to change the culture. The people in the majority group are the ones who need to advocate and need to support the underrepresented people to make room for them. And that is done by speaking up, by making people feel welcome, by, hey, that person is standing in a corner alone, feeling looking very lost. Maybe just go up to them, ask if they want some introductions. And if they say no, that's fine as well. But at least give them the opportunity to connect and, yeah, be an advocate in that sense.
Being an ally is very important, I think, and lifting people voices up and giving space. I like the giving space metaphor, and that's what actually happened with the all women and non-binary folks release in WordPress. It was like, hey, let's give people space, and we're not giving them space as a form of tokenism, but there were endless releases that were only men, and it's what Ruth I always mix up her family name Ginsburg with the poet, the judge, the
Ginsburg.
Yes, she said, when asked when is going to be enough women in the what is it called in English, the Supreme Court, when it's going to be, and she said 9 is going to be the good number, because there have been years and years of 9 men. But diversity, it's obviously not just about being men or a woman, of course, but that's a start. So when people say, oh no, if you do this thing only for women, or if you do things only for trans folks, or if you do things only for people of color, that's tokenism. And it's like, no, we're opening up the space for other people after we took it for so long. And that also refers back to what Mark and Koen were saying in the chat about the backlash from the bro culture. That's exactly that. It's that, it's like the men that every year say, and what about an international men's day? It's like, dude, every day is International Men's Day. Let us have this one. Zan, what about you? What do you think are good things for conferences and the tech industry?
Speaking to conference organizers specifically, I think the two things are patience and optics. Patience, because it's so easy to say you need to make the effort, but no one ever tells them that you have to make the effort, and then you have to keep making the effort year after year, even though you see no results. For example, I won't speak at a conference that I haven't been to before and go, oh, this would be a nice place to talk to. I won't apply to just random conferences. Survivorship bias. A lot of people asking people, what can we do? But you shouldn't be asking the people that are already coming to your conferences. Ask the people who aren't coming why they aren't. What can you do better? Listen to those people. Actually apply what you've been told instead of deciding what's best for them. And optics is more to do with how you behave and how your audience sees you, because the actions of the organizers pretty much set the lowest acceptable behavior. The optics of the organizers and the conference goers, the audience's perception of them can affect people's behavior. And so we did speak about this in the pre-talks. I'm not sure whether I'll bring it up, but mob mentality can affect the best of people. If everyone is doing something, you don't want to feel left out. And if everybody is being mean or breaking the code of conduct, then people are going to follow. The organizers have to set the lowest acceptable behavior.
And enforce.
Yes, and enforce it.
It doesn't look good if the organizers don't lead by example. And there have been, unfortunately, a lot of examples in the last few years, but we kind of want to focus on who's doing it right, so they can move on from that mentality of not setting a good example. I have a lot of links that I will post in the Slack. One thing that I really liked, so WordCamp London, which is one of the biggest WordCamps, so WordPress conferences in London, they had a playbook for years and they keep adjusting it. And they were the first ones to, I don't know, put tampons in bathrooms and make bathrooms genderless and provide the vegan options and, you know, all this kind of thing that they always seem a drop in the ocean, but I think they're really, really important because they really show that it's about listening and also maybe kind of putting people at ease so they don't have to ask. Is anyone feeling like that, or do you kind of think you know, it should always react to something and not anticipate someone's?
There was this brilliant tweet the other day from an account I highly recommend, Men Who Has It All, Twitter. And he tweeted like, isn't it time to add childcare to, you know, those football stadiums for all those men who have to take care of their children? And the tweets he does is basically turns things around, and it's largely gender based. So you have developer and male developer. So he turns things around, and it just is a really good way to make you think about all those preconceptions people have, all those assumptions people make about other people and about the generalizations which are out there and which people base products on, people base conferences on, people base a work environment on.
Koen says, speaking as a vegetarian, it's not a small thing when I see a vegetarian option on the menu. It makes a big impact on how I feel about that conference. It's true. If you start, even if no one asked for a vegetarian option, but you provide one, maybe, you know, someone will say, hey, this conference provides vegetarian option. This is a conference that I can attend without worrying where I will go and get food.
That's the whole thing about privilege and lowering barriers. I mean, if it's not made explicit that this will be available, you're putting up a barrier for anyone with vegetarian or vegan or needs kosher food or, you know, any dietary requirements people have, because they then have to take that extra step of providing for their own lunch. Which is for some people a barrier, and it's mental overhead, something extra they have to think about. And accessibility of a conference, inclusivity, is lowering those barriers to make people feel welcome.
Yeah, actually, there was an example I'm going to steal from, I think it was Francesca from one of our talks, to do with patients. It's not, conferences can't change and then just expect loads more people to come. They have got to prove themselves. Like if, I think your example was adding wheelchair access to the stage. Even if you don't have any disabled people or speakers, you're going to put that there. So someone who comes to the event will see it and go, oh, this is somewhere I might like to speak in the future. And it's going to take time, especially conferences are once a year. It's not going to change overnight. It's going to probably maybe 3 or 4 years. But eventually, if you keep on doing it, people are going to notice, and people are going to think, I feel welcome enough to apply to enter the call for papers. And then eventually, hopefully, maybe in a couple of years' time, the conference will see an uptick in the number of call for paper submissions, the diversity of subjects, the diversity of people coming, but it takes time.
I totally agree. And there was actually a call for papers I saw pass my screen this week, where they actively encourage people who only speak ASL, sign language, to apply as call for to the call for speakers, and they actively made sure that people who speak ASL would know it would be sorted out, that the translator would be there, and that they encouraged them to apply. And to me, that was an amazing thing to see.
Yeah, that's really cool. Seeing, that we're kind of also going past the thing that diversity is just about gender or color of skin, and we start to kind of, oh, look, it's not just about binary choices and options. Yes, you mentioned that in Sri Lanka you have 4 religions, and one of the things, and I linked to the Playbook of Working London because they were the first conference I saw with a quiet room and a multi-faith room, so people could go and pray. And actually, I think they kept it separate. They had the quiet room for people that just wanted, quiet time, and the faith room for people that wanted to pray. So I would imagine, as you said, in Sri Lanka, you have 4 different religions. That would probably be a very good way to also say, it doesn't matter. You'll have your space.
Yeah, true. These quiet rooms, I think it was a brilliant idea to, until you see something like this, you never realize, oh yeah, they're thinking about this thing too. So it makes people feel warmer to feel that, and they think about everything. They try to think about many things. Speaking of religion, I'm a Buddhist myself. So what we have in Buddhism is that every full moon day is a holy day, and we are supposed to go to temples. And I know that different religions, for example, if you're a Muslim person, every Friday after lunchtime, you go to a mosque. And these things are very easy things to figure out, right? Just Google or try to ask someone how I can make you feel welcome, how I can accommodate your beliefs and your faith to this conference, so we don't make things conflict with each other. And I like to say in the chat, Mark said, as a recovering alcoholic, I like to see more moves away from the alcoholic culture and come from social events. As a Buddhist person, it says that you should not drink alcohol drinks. So this would be going against many of the religions that we grow up with for all these years. There's one conference that I don't want to say the name or anything, but there was this conference that they asked me, do you like to go hang out with the people? This is before the conference, to a bar. So the venue is a bar. And if you're a person who doesn't want to drink alcohol, you have another group that you like to go, but they're not really being encouraged to put people together. So to separate the conference, separate the attendees. If you want to hang out in a bar, that's a place, probably the fun place. And there's the other place. If you don't really want to have a drink, this is where you could go. But yeah, people have different beliefs, people have different faiths. And when it comes to conferences, it can separate the audience, separate the community, oh, it can bring people together. So quiet rooms is a brilliant idea because it doesn't separate people. You have this time, preferably try to not put any talks or discussions on the time that these people probably go for a prayer. But the fact that there are silent rooms in the first place, I think it's a really good thing to see every year.
Yeah, that's a good improvement. Mark, I feel that the conversation around alcohol at conferences has been very prominent for a lot of years, because also, as you said, there's also a lot of other dangers inherent in alcohol consumption at such events. I agree. I have seen really not so great things. What I have, well, unfortunately, I haven't been to a word camp in over 2 years, but what at big word camps, Word Camp Europe, Word Camp US, for example, the party is always, the after party is always organized in a way that there are quiet areas also at the event itself. At Word Camp US, the last time we were there, there was a very limited choice of alcoholic beverage, so people couldn't really get super smashed. And the after party ended at 10. So, you know, if you are someone that after that wants to go out and like kind of party on until 6 a.m. in the morning, you can do it, but that's not part of the conference. The conference had fantastic a thing that they do in St. Louis. They have a thing that they called custard, but it's actually an ice cream. That's amazing. So they were giving this out instead of free beers, you know. And so I think there's a lot that can be done also at events. It also goes back a bit to this bro culture, and this is why I also believe it's great that we see, when I see at events people that are a bit older, because I know that, I mean, we're gonna get maybe a drink, but we're not gonna party until 6 a.m. And it also a bit sets the tone, right? And if the conference is made only of 20-something tech bros, then...
But it still happens a lot, especially at meetups, more so than at conferences. I mean, the amount of meetups I've spoken at where, you know, afterwards, let's have a drink, and the only option is beer or water. Well,
yeah.
first I'm driving, and second, I don't drink beer. So, okay, I'll have a water.
Yeah. We learned by our mistakes, I think. Also, I remember one year at Word Camp Torino, we had basically we had beer or water, and we said, okay, next year let's have more. So I think it's also like an incremental improvement that happens over the years. Anything else you want to add, our dear panelists and guests, before we move on to questions? Let's take 5-10 minutes to just go with the flow.
Maybe just reminding that conferences are designed for people. People first, technology second. Even though it's a tech conference, it wouldn't exist without people.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I really miss about live conferences. Actually, just sitting down with people and at a conference and hashing things out in person. I don't attend online conferences nearly as much as I would live conference, because conference for me are not about the talks. Largely, they are about meeting people and getting inspired by the different people I meet, learning from the different people I meet, and sharing what I've learned with different people I meet. And it just doesn't work the same with an online conference. But that again also is something says more about me than about
yeah. Hopefully someone is listening to us. Juliette, if everyone was going to conferences just to talk to other people, no one would be listening to our very interesting panel. No, there are people in the audience. I'm very, very happy. I'm seeing the suggestions coming in. Ayesh, any last word of wisdom, or an invite, or something you want to share with our audience?
It'd be nice to.
Sorry.
It'd be nice to mention the benefit that diversity has. It improves everything that we do. For conferences, it means an increase in CFP submissions. For business, it means your product appeals to a greater range of customers. For government, it means being useful to a greater percentage of your population. It just, diversity makes things better scientifically. I mean, I don't have any articles off the top of my head I can prove that with, but I'm sure Google works.
There's been research done by a number of consulting firms, and it's not even just that everything is better. It also increases the turnover and the business success and the long-term business success and the stockholders' satisfaction, etc., etc. All the business markers are also much better when a company has more diversity. And that has been researched in depth, I think, by McKinsey and also by Anderson.
Yeah. Ayesh?
Sorry. Speaking of conferences and meeting people, I think there are some statistics with most of the open source projects. If you take a look at all the commit drops, you can see that if the conference is last week, you can see a huge spike of commits because people are actually sitting down face to face, and it's easier to talk. It's easier to really understand what they're trying to say. I think Drupal 8, the bigger change in Drupal, it was written mostly on conferences because people meet and they sit down, they talk about the ideas, they talk about what should we do now. And instead of talking on the issue queue and replying them next day, it's really good that if everyone can come sit down, share their ideas, and just be open with everything. And people learn and people also contribute in conferences. I think that's a part that you don't really realize, but conferences actually make projects, or open source projects, they evolve mostly in conferences, not just learning, because people get to contribute.
So Dutch PHP conference next year, we're going to see each other in the Netherlands, I hope. Questions. First of all, while you think our audience drop some questions in the chat, Zuzana Herdova says, also example of a tiny thing people can do at meetups, conferences, etc. during introductions. If you asked everyone, where do you work? What do you work on? Please don't ask the maybe only woman present. How did you get into IT? Accepting differences and singling out our different beasts. Yes.
Can I add to that, please?
Yes.
You also don't ask her whether she works at a hotel or whether she's there with her boyfriend.
Oh, this happened so many
times. It
times.
happened to me multiple times, even when I was sitting there with a speaker's badge.
Yes.
It's like, seriously, look.
Yes. So we have one question in our Q&A section. If anyone has questions, there's a Q&A section where you can drop them. So Mark Baker asks, does the panel believe that the existing bro culture in tech is pushing back more heavily against diversity and initiative and the inclusion initiatives? I can read. What do you all think?
Yes and no. Yeah, definitely yes, but no more differently than any other industry where people just don't like change.
I see like two groups diverging. I see a certain part of the industry which is getting behind diversity and will help and advocate for it. And a certain part who's so fed up of hearing about it, it will just call everything cancel culture. And it feels like we're drifting further apart instead of coming closer together.
Yeah, I think so too.
That's another interesting book for everyone, Brotopia. I don't know if you read it, but it talks about the bro culture in tech and how it is actually really keeping people from entering the industry. What I sadly think, Mark, is that the bro culture is, I'm not afraid of the bro culture when they're clearly pushing against the diversity and inclusion initiatives. I'm a lot more scared of the fake standing behind these initiatives. I know a woman in the WordPress space that in the last 3 years has changed 3 companies, and she always left. She's a developer, and she always left because she went to HR to say that she received a horrible treatment as a female developer. And all these companies, which I cannot mention, are all about putting the rainbow flag on Pride Month and investing millions of euros in diversity and inclusion training for their employees. So personally, I'm a bit more worried about that, because if if you come out and if you are coming out and say this is cancel culture, all this politically correct, blah blah blah, then I know who you are and I can recognize you. But if you drop millions of dollars in changing your logo for Pride Month, or putting millions of dollars to buy computers in underrepresented groups of people, but then ultimately the people that work for you will leave because they've been treated badly, that's more sneaky and hard to recognize.
Yeah, the virtue signaling is really, really bad. It also relates to like how all of these companies are giving money to like women who code and doing all these mentoring doing mentoring and internships, but never actually giving them the opportunities once they've taught them everything. They go, oh, we've taught you everything, and now you're on your own. We're not going to give you the opportunity.
Yeah. Another thing that came up during our prep calls was the fact that underrepresented people in tech are over-mentored and underfunded and under represented, even after all the training and all the mentoring, then they don't get hired, and there's a short circuit somewhere there. So definitely.
And don't forget underpaid.
And underpaid, which could be the topic for next year panel, the gender and the pay gap in tech, which is something that I would love to address. But I think we are at the end of our time. We took a few minutes more. I think we can take a few minutes more if anyone has any questions for our panelists or just want to say something. We could, as you can tell, we could probably go on and on for hours talking about this topic. We're all very passionate about it, and we all have different experiences with it. So you'll have to stop us and take us out of the air at some point. But before that happens, this is a chance to ask questions. I do have one coming in. Danielle says, Danielle Surland, I hope I didn't mispronounce your name. Sorry if I did. What could we do to encourage companies to take diversity and inclusion seriously and take action? Should we perhaps be mentoring CEOs, not employees? Well, good luck with that. If you manage to mentor your CEO, we're with you.
Appeal to their profit margins.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's why I keep making those business arguments, because generally at sea level, that's the thing which wins people over.
I think talking about revenues and profit and showing numbers is really very convincing for CEOs and CFOs and all the C-suite people. I mean, it's sad that we have to think about how to convince them, right? But at the same time, it's like the tokenism. No one likes it, but if this is a way to put your foot inside the door and then take it from there, why not, right? So I definitely think appealing to their business sense would be good. I wonder if that's enough, though, if that doesn't stop at, you know, pink washing or whatever we want to call it. So
with more C-level diversity, that you often get a sponsor or someone at least on the board at some point who will actively believe what we're talking about and actually understand the issues. And if you have someone at that level as an advocate, that's very powerful. I mean, at the end of the day, be the change you want to see. And if people lead by example, it will help make the change we want to see.
Yeah. I agree. Any other thoughts or questions, ideas? I keep dropping books because every time we say something, I'm like, oh, I read about this. Anyone has any other questions for us, for the panelists mostly? Looks like no. So Tony, I think.
Yeah, you still have 3 minutes left.
Okay.
If you want.
I copied the links we've posted so far, and I think we should share those in Slack later as well.
Yes. I did share this last one. I promise this is going to be the last one. Resilient Management by
I bought that since you mentioned it.
It's a great book. Because first of all, she checks her privilege at the door, and that is not, you know, that's not. And she talks a lot about the difference between mentoring, coaching, and sponsoring. So sponsoring is the nirvana, is giving opportunities, is not just, you know, saying let's do this and let's do that. And she has tons of actionable in the book. So I think it's a really good one, even if you're not a manager, but if you kind of operate inside the company, it gives a lot of good ideas also about how to organize this sort of initiatives. I am very much a do person. I do talk a lot, but I'm more of a doer, and I like it when people kind of use these things and do it for real. And so, for example, and I'm going to give the example of Joost because, in my opinion, they're really good, doing a great job. So for years now, the company has had a diversity fund, which was used to send the speakers from underrepresented groups to events, because WordCamps don't pay speakers. What does this mean? That only the people that can afford.
Just to qualify, WordCamps, it's not that they don't pay speakers, they don't even cover costs at all.
Yes,
they
nothing.
Don't compensate speakers for costs.
Nothing. They don't pay
Most conferences don't pay speakers, but at least they cover costs, and WordCamps.
Yes, don't. So they had this fund, and they were able to send, I think, over 70 people to conferences that they wouldn't have had the opportunity to attend. So this is, I think these are really the things that we could also be very convincing to CEOs, because yes, it's also great publicity. So, you know, it's like, if you think about it, I think if you you also get out of this. This is the ideal. This is the unicorn. You're like, you know what? This is good for business, and it works. So yeah, I think we're done with our time. It flew by. I'm very sad that this is over. This was really great, Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Francesca. Thank you, Juliette, Zan, and Ayesh. I mean, we had an amazing time listening to you. I think we could do it for many more hours if you want, but sadly we have to stop now. So again, many thanks to you for doing this. I mean, and to the others, if there are still questions, I mean, even later today or tomorrow, you can do it through Slack.
Yes.
And then, yeah, tomorrow we continue. We continue with DPC with 6 other new talks. Sorry. So we hope to see you all there too. And have an amazing evening. And thank you again. Cheers to everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.